Welcome to this episode of AU Manufacturing Conversations, which is part of our media partnership with Hannover Messe's Industrial Transformation Australia Expo. ITA runs from July 22 to 24 at the Dome at Sydney Olympic Park. Registration is free and you can see more info in the episode guide. Now on with the show. John, it's a pleasure to have you on AU Manufacturing Conversations, and thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Brent, and great to be here for you and your listeners.
Thank you very much. We're delighted to finally be hearing from you in a podcast format. Let's get started, John, with a bit about you, please, your work, and some background info for people who might not have met you before.
December this year marks my 50th anniversary in Australia manufacturing, so I've got a few grey hairs and I think I've earned every one of them. I think the last sort of 25 years has been very much heavily focused on helping manufacturers do better things with data, specifically around Industry 4.0 digital transformation. I ended up building a factory, being part of a factory build team in 2011 that turned out, when Industry 4 was being coined by Germany, turned out to be a smart factory. In fact, I was out there a few weeks ago and the factory manager said that they ran the entire plant with one person and the warehouse with two people the week before because of labour shortages, and it proved effectively that it's a lights out, almost, what they call a dark factory. And that was 14 years ago. So the fact that that factory is still producing and exporting goods and making volume and has grown from strength to strength is a long-term testament to me that when organisations, manufacturers in particular, do well with data and make factories smart, we can be, globally competitive. So that's been my main aim, is to educate organisations, firstly, what digital transformation is and isn't, what Industry 4 is about, and how to apply that in a way that's not eating the elephant all at once. And in fact, I sometimes describe to clients how they can apply Industry 4 to just one piece of equipment and they get a little bit surprised that it's that simple. So there's a lot of misinformation out there that a lot of vendors trying to push platforms onto people that they're not ready for. And I've developed a bit of a following on LinkedIn for being a straight shooter and for calling out the BS, when I see it. But I'm finding traditionally a lot of manufacturers are struggling because they haven't even gone down the Industry 3.0 path yet of computerization and connectivity to be able to get data out of equipment. And effectively, they're all nearly lacking a decent strategy that they can implement over the next 3 to 5 years. And so my appeal to manufacturers is spend some time and actually get a strategy in place. It's not as expensive as you think, and it then gives you a direction. Some wag said, when we don't know where we're going, any road will do. And I prefer manufacturers to have a direction that they know they need to walk on the next 3 to 5 years so that they don't get put out of business, basically.
Well, in line with that, I'd like to hear about your involvement in Industrial Transformation Australia, the expo that's coming up. What's the focus going to be? You mentioned earlier that you're going to be giving a speech and you'll also be involved on a panel. If you could just tell me something, please, about what you'll be talking about, I'm sure that'll be interesting for listeners.
Each person on the panel's obviously got their own specialty. I can't speak for the other panelists at this stage because I'm not quite sure who they are, but my contribution will be on that same line as Industry 4 and digital transformation and what it means. And my brief presentation will be explaining how we can get the rubber to hit the road without betting the farm on it. One of the key things that I see that I think is important for listeners to understand is that many organisations that have walked down this path and tried the digital transformation approach end up getting stuck in what we call pilot purgatory. And the reason they do that is that the leadership is lacking in the organisation in the first place to set the trajectory. So out of necessity, plant floor people, where I've spent most of my life, come up with these great ideas. They then go into proof of concept. Because there's no executive level buy-in, they then hit the ceiling of CFOs who then don't want to invest money in a proof of concept. So my approach is to educate organisations that firstly, they need leadership buy-in. So it's top down to set the direction, but bottom up to then pick up the projects that they want to do work with. But the mind shift at the factory level is changing from proof of concept to proof of value. And the reason I say that is that proof of concept means it's a technical question. Will it work? Well, we've been collecting data from the edge, from equipment and plant for 40 years. And we've been putting it on trends and charts and databases and business intelligence dashboards for about that time as well. So we need to let go of the proof of concept idea. We don't need to do that anymore. What we need to do is change the value equation from a proof of concept, technically will it work, to a proof of value, will it save me money? And the reason for that is that when we then go to a CFO in our organisation who's going to sign the check or approve the purchase order, he or she wants to know, well, is this investment going to save me something? And if so, what is that? And what evidence do you have that it will? And if we approach it from that direction, we have less resistance, because then the executive level has already been aligned to the fact that we need to do things more sustainably. We need to reduce our inputs, so power, water, gas, raw materials and people, and we need to maximise our outputs, which is, improving finished goods and reducing waste.
So the, journey to Industry 4, or however we want to put it, has been, it's been something that people have been talking about in Australia for well over a decade. What's your perspective from what you've seen as a consultant and within companies and some other places on Industry 4 adoption, the transition in Australia, and are there any sort of particular challenges you think there are in the Australian context?
Yes and yes. A lot of organisations don't even know what Industry 4 is. I remember a few years ago talking to the owner of a franchise that was a food franchise, and they were making stuff in a main manufacturing facility. And I wrote to this guy on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm an Industry 4, blah, 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 blah. And he says, never heard of it, don't know what it is, sounds gimmicky. And that was from the CEO of the company. I was like, wow, I've been sleeping under a rock. The challenge is that I heard recently through, I think it was Siemens in Germany, estimated that only 4% of German industry, where Industry 4 was coined as a term, only 4% of German manufacturers are adopting or on the path of Industry 4.0, which is a maturity. Over the years, you become more mature, and there's 4 very defined steps. But in Australia, I reckon it's less than 1%. There are very, very few manufacturers here that are on any sort of path to Industry 4 maturity. And the reason for that is twofold. One is we have so much legacy equipment. I ran a survey on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, Brent, where I asked, because I have my own number in my head, and I said, the question was, what percentage of Australian manufacturing do you think is being made on already fully depreciated kit? And I reckon it's 85% plus. And that's what the survey came out. It was 80% plus. So we now have islands of equipment that were never meant to be part of an intrinsic integrated network where data could be extracted and shared both along the internal supply chain and vertically with, ERP systems and stuff like that. The export of our manufacturing to Southeast Asia was a one-way street. We now can't bring that back because it's inefficient. We'd have to now buy land, build a building, invest capital in new equipment. And so that's a resistance and a barrier to entry for organisations that might want to reshore. So overall, Australia is a bit behind the 8 ball because we haven't closed out Industry 3.0, which is really the ability to have computerized equipment, like PLC control and SCADA control and stuff like that, where we can firstly mine the data, but also get it on a network. So we need IT support to have cybersecurity and firewalls and switches and all that infrastructure in place as well, which I call, lighting up the factory. And it's remarkable the number of factories that I visit today that still don't have a decent, stable, factory-based network that equipment can be connected to, that we can mine information from to give people real-time information about what's going on in their process. I was talking to a client end of last year. I interviewed a bunch of people to do what I call a readiness assessment, which is one of my things that I offer. And this man said, I come to work every day, I log on to 6 different systems with 6 different 10-digit passwords that IT tells me I'm not allowed to write down. If I get one wrong 3 times, I'm out and I've got to raise a help desk ticket. He said, I get all these sort of flat files and extracts and CSVs out of these systems, and I put them into my big, cumbersome spreadsheet, and I end up with a report around lunchtime that shows me that I'm where I'm meant to be. And he does that 5 days a week. And I sit back and scratch my head going, that is just crazy stuff, because he's a continuous improvement guy. And he should be able to come into work and see a dashboard on his desk with 4 green dials, 1 red dial, and go, oh, that's what I need to look at today.
Lastly, in this fairly short interview, I'm going to close out by asking you if, further than the above, is there an issue within the industry that you think isn't getting the attention it currently deserves?
Fundamentally, it's investment and the development of strategy as to the next 3 to 5 years. Where are we going to be positioned in both the local market, but if we also want to export within the international market. You saw recently the level of complexity that was done by Harvard University, and Australia's dropped from 70th in complexity on the world stage to 105th. It's a continuing decline. I think we're stuck somewhere between Botswana and the Ivory Coast. And that's a problem for us because the decline in manufacturing is continuing. And until we decide, both at an individual and collective level, that we want to maintain some semblance of manufacturing in Australia, and to do that, we need a strategy at the individual level to make sure that companies can remain sustainable.
Well, that's everything we have time for, John. So thank you very much for joining us on AU Manufacturing Conversations. A pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Brent. Always a pleasure. Thank you.